He'd been managing his blood pressure for 11 years. Medications, checkups, low-sodium diet, he did everything right, and for most of that time his numbers were reasonable. Controlled, his doctor said, nothing to worry about. Then something changed. His morning readings started creeping up. Not dramatically, just enough to be noticeable. 138 became 145, then 152. His doctor adjusted his medication, but the numbers kept climbing, and always in the morning, always after a night of sleep. Nobody could figure out why, until we started talking about what he did every single night before bed. I want to share that with you today, because what we found in his case wasn't rare. In fact, once I started looking for it, I saw it constantly. In patient after patient, the same quiet habit, the same pattern, the same overlooked connection to blood pressure that nobody had thought to ask about. And there's a good chance it's happening in your home too.
Let me start by telling you something about blood pressure that most people don't fully appreciate. Your blood pressure is not a fixed number. It moves. It rises when you're stressed, when you exert yourself, when you're cold. It drops when you rest, when you're warm, when you sleep. This movement is natural and healthy. In fact, the nighttime drop in blood pressure, what doctors call nocturnal dipping, is one of the ways your heart gets to rest and recover. Ideally, your blood pressure at night should be somewhere around 10 to 20% lower than your daytime reading. That dip is protective. Studies consistently show that people whose blood pressure dips normally at night have significantly lower rates of heart attack, stroke, and kidney disease than people whose pressure stays elevated around the clock. So when a patient's morning readings are high, when that overnight dip isn't happening, it tells me something is interfering with the process. Something is keeping the cardiovascular system in a kind of alert state when it should be winding down. The question is, what? And the answer, more often than people expect, is something happening in the hours right before bed. Let's talk about the habit itself, and I want to be specific because vague warnings don't help anyone. The single most common nighttime habit I see quietly disrupting blood pressure in people over 60 is late eating. Specifically, eating a substantial meal or even a significant snack within 2 to 3 hours of going to sleep. Now, I know that doesn't sound alarming. It sounds like something your grandmother might have mentioned, almost as an aside. Don't eat too late. But the physiology behind it is more serious than most people realize, and the impact on overnight blood pressure is well documented and genuinely significant. Here's what happens. When you eat, your digestive system goes to work. Blood gets redirected away from other areas toward the gut. Insulin rises. Inflammation markers increase temporarily. Your heart rate picks up slightly. Your blood vessels respond to the metabolic activity happening in your abdomen. In a younger, fully responsive cardiovascular system, this is managed smoothly. The body handles the meal, processes it, and returns to baseline relatively quickly. But after 60, that recovery process takes longer. The vessels are a little stiffer. The insulin response is a little slower. The whole system takes more time to settle back down. And if you go to sleep while that process is still running, while your body is still in digestion mode, still managing blood sugar, still redirecting blood flow, your cardiovascular system doesn't get to downshift the way it needs to. The nocturnal dip doesn't happen, or it happens much less than it should. The result? Elevated blood pressure throughout the night. And elevated readings when you wake up in the morning. I think about a woman I'll call Patricia, 67, recently retired, living alone. She came in concerned about her morning blood pressure readings, which had been stubbornly high for about 5 months, despite being on 2 medications. We talked for a long time, and somewhere in the middle of the conversation, she mentioned, almost as background noise, that she'd gotten into the habit of watching television in the evenings and snacking. Nothing heavy. Crackers, cheese, sometimes a small bowl of cereal. She ate dinner around 5, and the snacking usually happened between 8 and 10. She went to bed around 10:30. I asked her to do one thing before we considered changing her medication. Just one thing. Stop eating after 7. Give her body a 3-hour window before sleep with nothing going in. She came back 6 weeks later. Her morning readings had dropped an average of 11 points. She was the same person, the same medications, the same stress level. The only variable was when she stopped eating. 11 points is not a trivial change. That's the difference between a blood pressure that causes concern and one that doesn't. Now, late eating is the most common culprit I see, but it's not the only one, and I'd be doing you a disservice if I stopped there. The second habit I want to talk about is alcohol in the evening. A glass of wine with dinner, a beer while watching the news, maybe a small nightcap to help with sleep. For many people, this feels harmless, even healthy, given everything they've heard about red wine and heart health over the years. But here's what actually happens to blood pressure when you drink alcohol in the hours before bed. Alcohol initially causes blood vessels to dilate. That's why you feel warm and relaxed. Your blood pressure may actually drop slightly in the first hour or two. This is partly why people use it as a sleep aid. It does help you fall asleep faster, but then comes the rebound. As your body processes and eliminates the alcohol, which happens largely in the middle of the night, several things occur simultaneously. Your sympathetic nervous system activates, your heart rate increases, your blood vessels, which had been dilated, begin to constrict, and your blood pressure rises, often significantly, often right in that window between 2 and 4 in the morning, when it should be at its lowest. This is why habitual evening drinkers often show what's called non-dipping or even reverse-dipping blood pressure patterns, where their nighttime pressure is higher than their daytime pressure, which is almost exactly backwards from what the body needs. And the next morning, they feel groggy, slightly unwell, and can't quite figure out why, because 2 glasses of wine doesn't feel like something that should do that much, but it does, consistently, quietly, every night. The third habit is one that will surprise you, and it surprised me too when I first saw the research clearly laid out. Screen time. Specifically, bright screen exposure. Phone, tablet, television in the hour before bed. Most people have heard that blue light disrupts melatonin and affects sleep quality. That part is true and well established. But what's less discussed is the direct effect of stimulating content on the sympathetic nervous system, the fight-or-flight system, and what that does to blood pressure in the hours that follow. Think about what most people watch or read before bed. News, social media, emotionally engaging television, true crime, political commentary. Even something as passive as scrolling through a news feed involves a constant low-level stream of alerting information. Things that require a response, that trigger mild reactions, that keep a part of your brain in a state of evaluation. Each of those micro-triggers causes a small release of stress hormones. Individually, they're nothing. Cumulatively, over an hour of pre-sleep screen exposure, they maintain a measurable level of sympathetic activation in your nervous system. And then you turn off the light and expect your cardiovascular system to immediately downshift. It doesn't. It can't. The nervous system doesn't have an off switch. It winds down gradually. And if you've been stimulating it right up until the moment you closed your eyes, that wind down happens during what should be your deepest, most restful sleep. Blood pressure stays elevated. The heart doesn't get its recovery window, and you wake up feeling like you didn't quite sleep, even though technically you were in bed for 8 hours. I had a patient, a 74-year-old retired engineer, very analytical, very precise, who tracked everything. He wore a blood pressure monitor overnight for 2 weeks. And he noticed something himself, without any prompting from me. On nights he read a physical book before bed, his overnight readings averaged about 8 points lower than on nights he watched television until he fell asleep. 8 points, just from the screen. He was skeptical at first, so he ran the experiment for another 2 weeks, alternating deliberately. The pattern held every single time. There's a fourth thing I want to mention, and it ties together everything we've talked about: sleep position and sleep apnea. Obstructive sleep apnea, where the airway partially or fully collapses during sleep, causing breathing to stop and restart repeatedly, is dramatically underdiagnosed in people over 60, and it is one of the most powerful drivers of elevated morning blood pressure that exists. Every time breathing stops, even for 10 or 15 seconds, the oxygen level in the blood drops. The brain, detecting this, sends an emergency signal, Adrenaline spikes. The heart rate surges, blood pressure jumps, and then breathing resumes and the body settles again until it happens again, maybe 2 minutes later. This had happened dozens, sometimes hundreds of times per night, and the person sleeping has no idea. They don't remember waking up. They just know they feel exhausted in the morning, and their blood pressure is inexplicably high, and their medication doesn't seem to be working as well as it used to. The connection between sleep apnea and treatment-resistant hypertension is one of the most robust in cardiovascular medicine. And yet the question, have you been evaluated for sleep apnea, is still asked far too rarely during blood pressure appointments. If your blood pressure is elevated in the morning, particularly if you snore, if you're told you stop breathing at night, if you wake up with headaches, if you feel genuinely unrefreshed after what should have been adequate sleep, please ask about a sleep study. It is a simple, non-invasive test, and the difference that treating sleep apnea makes to blood pressure can sometimes exceed what medications alone can achieve. So let's talk about what you can actually do, not in a vague, general way, but specifically and practically. Give yourself a 3-hour window between your last meal and bedtime. I know that can require rearranging habits that have been in place for years, but this single change, for patients with elevated morning blood pressure, consistently produces measurable results. If you find it hard to go to bed without eating something, try a small amount of protein, a few slices of turkey, a handful of nuts, rather than carbohydrates, which spike blood sugar and prolong the digestive activation I described earlier. If you drink alcohol, try shifting it earlier, with dinner rather than after, and observe your morning readings for a few weeks. You don't need to eliminate it entirely to see a difference. Timing matters almost as much as quantity. Create a 30-minute wind down before sleep that doesn't involve screens. I know this sounds impossibly simple, but the patients who actually do it consistently report changes in both sleep quality and blood pressure that they didn't expect. A book, a short walk, gentle stretching, quiet conversation. The nervous system needs a transition, not an abrupt shutoff. If you take blood pressure medication, have a conversation with your doctor about timing. Some medications work more effectively when taken in the evening. They're active during the night when blood pressure is most problematic for certain patients. This is an individualized decision, but it's worth asking about specifically. And track your own numbers. Not obsessively, but purposefully. Take your blood pressure at the same time each morning, before you get up and before you eat or drink anything. Write it down for 2 weeks. That data, that simple, consistent record, gives your doctor something to work with that a single office reading simply can't provide. I want to close with something I think about often. Blood pressure is called the silent killer, not because it causes no symptoms, but because the symptoms it does cause are so easy to attribute to other things. The morning fatigue, the slight heaviness behind the eyes, the occasional dizziness when you stand up too fast, the headache that clears by mid-morning. We explain these things away. We say we didn't sleep well. We say it's the weather. We say it's stress. And sometimes it is those things. But sometimes it's the body trying to tell us in the only language it has that something isn't working the way it should. And the nightly habits we bring to bed with us, the late dinner, the glass of wine, the hour of television, are quietly, consistently making it harder for the heart to do its job. The good news, and I mean this sincerely, is that these are changeable things. Not with surgery, not necessarily with more medication, just with awareness and deliberate adjustment. The body responds. Even after 60, even after years of a pattern, it responds. Patricia's 11-point drop didn't take months. It took 6 weeks. The engineer's overnight numbers shifted within days of changing his pre-sleep routine. Small changes, consistent application, real results. That's not optimism. That's just how the cardiovascular system works when you stop working against it. I want to hear from you. Which of these habits resonated with you? Is it the late eating, the evening drink, the television you fall asleep to? Be honest with yourself, and honest with me in the comments. You'd be surprised how often one person's comment helps someone else recognize something they've been overlooking. And if someone in your life is dealing with blood pressure that doesn't seem to respond the way it should, share this with them. Sometimes the piece that's missing is the simplest one. If this was helpful, there's another video I'd encourage you to watch about the early morning symptoms that signal your blood pressure medication may need to be reassessed. It connects directly to everything we talked about today, and a lot of people have told me it answered questions they'd been carrying around for years. Take care of yourself tonight. And maybe, just this once, turn the screen off a little earlier. Your heart will thank you for it.